Very much, Tom. Martin, nice to see you.
Evening.
Great. Okay, so let me jump in. I want to just establish a little bit of context for why this interview today with you. So if we go back to 1995, I was fledgling music manager of a band called June, and I believe that you and I first met in Austin at South by Southwest 1995 when Beggars was one of the suitors for signing the band June. Uh, for lack of a better memory, we're going to call it that today.
Yeah, I, I,
Um,
I'll, I'll accept that.
okay, you'll accept that. Okay,
It's a
good.
long time.
It's been a long time. So 2 years after that, June had broken up, and I came to work for you and for Leslie Bleakley, who was running the U.S. office for Beggars Group in New York City. I started out in radio and marketing and IT, and then about a year after that, we started doing quarterly digital meetings with the different label heads, and I got lumped into those along with Tim Collins, who was running IT at the time, because I had some digital background. And at one point, you expressed a desire to start a digital department, and I was maybe the person in that group that was most interested in upgrading my job. And so I raised my hand, and that's how my digital career started. So I have you to thank for that, amongst a million other things. And I guess what's always surprised me about our relationship is the extent to which you gave me latitude and support to sort of chart my own path when I was with Beggars. And it's consistent with what I've seen you say elsewhere, which is that your job as the leader of the organization isn't just to exert influence downward, but rather to sort of channel enthusiasm and ideas upward. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
and
It wasn't just you that we gave that attitude to. I'm afraid it's a general policy. I believe that you should hire people you think are great, and then get out of their way and let them do what they do, and let them grow and learn and contribute.
Indeed, and that's just one of the lessons that I've taken from you over my years in business. And I think before I jump into questions, and then I really am going to let you do most of the talking here, but I just want to take a quick opportunity to say, really to thank you for your guidance and support over the years. It's not all that often I have the opportunity to say it to your face and in front of my peers, but I don't know what kind of music executive I would have become had we not crossed paths. But I've always felt extraordinarily fortunate that you were actually my guide and model in this respect, and that you helped me articulate my vision around independent music for my company and really for my entire music career, and also the way in which I've chosen to interface with younger colleagues and new entrants into the music industry. So I'll always be in your debt for that, and I appreciate it
Well,
so
and
much.
and we're in your debt too, because you helped us discover how to make digital work.
Thank you very much. Okay, on that note, let's jump into it. So I'd like to start by talking about your musical influences and how those sort of shaped your early decisions
Hmm.
to, I guess, first start a mobile disco in London with Nick Austin, and then take a job in a record shop, and then think about creating your own record shop, which of course was the Rough Trade group of shops, and
So not
eventually
then.
start a
No,
label.
no, it's the Beggars Banquet group of stores at the start. Rough Trade was a few decades later.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about it.
In terms of the music I was listening to,
Yeah.
um, I guess when my intensive early discovery period, I suppose, was when I was 17 or 18, and I suppose you could best describe what I liked as English folk rock. So the Incredible String Band, Fairport Convention, and the American equivalents in the Byrds and everything that came from the Byrds. So that was where my musical starting point, and I guess I ended up doing this because I wanted to introduce people to music that was had a comparable effect to the effect that there was on me when I was listening to Astor Weeks, for example.
Okay. that makes a lot of sense to me. Thinking back over the catalog of music that you brought to us. Um, can you can you expand a little bit more about what was happening at the time when you know you sort of were out of college and you were thinking about turning this into a career? What was the transition point for you really when you thought, oh, I can actually do this as a job?
Well, I was at college. I was at university in Oxford from 67 to 70. So during the kind of student revolution, flower power days, which is probably the best possible time to have been at university. And when I left, I spent as long as I possibly could not having a job because that was desirable in those days. And I eventually got shoehorned into one doing research for the government on a white paper that was written. And when that finished, I got a job in a second-hand record shop, just by way of complete contrast. And a friend became a partner, and we set up the first store, and that was in 74, and it grew from there.
And how did so the stores, as I understand the history, were were they relatively successful out of the gate, or did it take a minute to get them going? What was the
They they did well straight away. I mean, the idea of the store, because I'd been working in a second-hand record store, and then actually that I my degree was partially in economics, and I was attracted by the fact that this second-hand record store used to price records according to a perfectly simple supply and demand principle. Every record got put out at the highest possible price that it could be at, considering only the condition, not what the record was. And every couple of weeks, we marked the prices down by 20 pence until the records hit the price at which they sold. It was very neat. But our idea was to start a store with second-hand records and new records side by side in the same racks. So you had a choice of buying a new record or a scratch record or a good condition second-hand record. That was what made us unique. And it really worked. And we set up a store in Earl's Court, and within a few years, we had 6 stores, some of which were better than others. But we became a mini chain in, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years.
fantastic? And then by the end of the 70s, you had started seeing bands or started coming into contact with bands where you thought, I'm in a position to put out this music. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of that thinking?
We built a rehearsal studio underneath one of our stores, and a lot of punk bands started rehearsing there. And one of them started being managed by the manager of the store. He wanted to help. He wanted help, so he came to us, and we started managing them. They were the lurkers. Um, Nobody wanted to sign them because everyone had already signed one punk band, and nobody wanted more than one. And so we put the record out ourselves, and we kind of drew our own roadmap of how to start a label in a way which is a very, very common practice these days, but back then was kind of almost unheard of.
Okay. And that was the Beggar's Banquet label.
It was.
So shortly thereafter, as I understand the history, um, Ivor Watts Russell started working with you at 4AD. Sorry, he started working with you at the Rough Trade shop.
No,
And
not Rough Trade, the biggest banquet shops.
sorry, the
He
Beggar's
was
Banquet
he was
shops.
he was a shop manager.
He was a shop manager. Okay. And what was the genesis of, you had this focus. By the way, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you tell the answer to it to everybody else. What was the genesis um, of getting involved with Ivo on 4AD? How did that come about? What was the differing music focus? Why two labels instead of one?
You've skipped a big part of the story, which was our friend Gary Neiman, who had
Indeed.
had multi-million selling records around the world a few years after we started as a label. So frankly, we got very lucky very early. And starting 4AD was kind of a reaction to Gary's success because we were kind of dominated by looking after Gary for a period of time. And we got kind of taken outside our musical comfort zone, if you like, and what we were doing with 4AD was starting again and and giving the new music that was happening some oxygen.
Okay. So new music. Um, and through the 80s, can you take a minute? I mean, there's so much history to cover in there, but I think maybe what our audience will be most interested in hearing is just what it felt like in the 80s, how it was growing these two fledgling labels, and I guess what stands out from that time? What are your most definitive memories from that period?
Well, I guess it was the goth decade, and both Beggars Banquet and 4AD were playing that furrow pretty comprehensively.
Mhm.
We found that our artists was went out, played lives, got supported by other artists. So we signed Sudden Death Cult, and then sorry, we signed Bauhaus came first. We signed Bauhaus, and they got supported by Sudden Death Cult, and then when they went out, the Cocktail Twins were there, and the Birthday Party, and Dead Can Dance. So all of these bands were completely mixed in. They were all kind of very dark and dramatic and sad, which suited us very well. And we had a decade in which we dominated that kind of music. I mean, that's not mentioning Gino Cesbron and Flesh for Lulu, and it was also our entryway into America as well, because a lot of those artists got signed, licensed by us to American labels, and started building careers there. And some of them are still doing it.
Indeed, they are. Um, okay, so let's maybe hop forward to the end of that decade, and you establish a relationship, or you establish, I guess, um, well, I'll let you characterize it, but relationship with Richard Russell at XL. So, can you talk a little bit about how that? I mean, that was a real shift in musical focus. Can you talk about that?
It started off as a partnership with a guy called Tim Palmer, who his mother ran a dance record shop in Soho, and it was just that the spirit behind the dance revolution of '87 was not that dissimilar to the spirit behind the punk revolution of '77, and so it suited us spirit-wise, even if the music was quite different, and we recognised the spirit behind it, the garage, making records in your bedroom stuff, and it was a fairly natural. It was a natural but odd fit in a way, the way that kind of rock music was joined by dance music. But it was records that, I know, Blondie's Heart of Glass, I think, was probably, to me, the record that first perfectly combined the two worlds. And then, of course, we started releasing records about Prodigy, who were an electronic act, but playing in a completely dance format. They were playing live, they were doing everything a rock act did, but it sounded like a dance act.
Okay. All right. So by the end of, let's call it by the end of the 80s, your your participation included approximately three labels. I'm sure you had other relationships in place too, but um, what's interesting to me about that is you were one of the first independent label groups that I became aware of, where you had a group of labels assembled together. And of course, by the time I got on the picture, there was already quite an established structure
Mm.
around a shared sort of hub of business resource, and then individual A&R, and maybe in some cases individual art at the different labels. And I'm just curious if that was, I mean, you told me once that, the thinking behind that was that labels go up and down. That they're successful for one period, and then maybe they're less successful because they're building a new, group of bands, for instance. So, were you thinking about that at the time, or did that just sort of occur
It
after it
was
happened? Was it strategic?
it was kind of accidental, really. I mean, Voidy started because Beggars had Gary Newman. XL started because there was this whole spirit of electronic that fitted what we were doing. and it just kind of, I can't really remember any point of realization in which I thought I've got a label group here. But at some point, we called Beggars Banquet the group, and over the 90s, we developed what we call this hub and spoke structure, whereby we had the core group providing services to all the labels. In fact, it's not new. I mean, the majors do it all the time. It's that the majors don't normally do it with labels, all of which are 50-50 joint ventures. But for me, it was a way of bringing in people and working with people who are running labels on a 50-50 basis and having a balancing seesaw, if you like, between the input of the mothership and the input of the label. And the labels don't tell the mothership what to do, and the mothership doesn't tell the labels what to do. People work in harmony, in theory at least, most of the time.
Exactly. And you're still using that structure today. So there's
Indeed, and it's grown and become officialized, if you like. And now it's, if you work with us or you come and visit us, it's very clear how it works. And the central people do all of the business stuff, and the label people do all the creative stuff.
so about this time, maybe a little bit after this, is it where we sort of catch up to where I came into your orbit, other than being aware of a variety of different bands, and fans of many of them prior to coming into your orbit. Um, when I started working for Beggars and started traveling overseas, or when you would come over to the US office, I remember always being surprised, pleasantly surprised, at how often you were out at shows. And I know this continues. I don't know very many other executives that go to see more music shows than you do, um, certainly over the arc of your career. I can't quite understand why you don't have a hearing aid. As you know, I have a hearing aid now from having seen a lot of them myself. I don't know how you got away from that, but um, you know, I guess let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sort of the later 90s at this point, and the emergence of digital, because the emergence of digital coincided to some extent with what I saw at Beggars as an increased focus on um, independent collectivism.
Can
On
can I interrupt you for a second? Because you've got
You bet.
more questions building up than I'm going to remember the
Okay.
answers to. So before we move
All
on,
right. Slow down.
firstly, I should say there's plenty of creativity in Beggars Group as well. I correcting myself. Creativity isn't just in the labels. But in terms of going out live, I remember years ago I had a conversation with Andrew Heath, who you know well, who's my partner in the publishing company, and he said that he much preferred listening to music on record than live. And I said, that's kind of weird because I run a company that makes music on record, but actually I get far more out of seeing an artist live. And I always have. I've always just loved going to shows and just watching things happen, watching artists and audiences connect. And you know, most of my great musical memories are shows like TV on the Radio at the Milky Way in Amsterdam, Warpaint at Emos in Austin, Bauhaus at ULU in London. I mean, the memories of shows, especially shows where the connection between the audience and the artist becomes so tangible that at the end of a song, the applause can just go on for an unnaturally long length of time, and everyone, including the artist, going, "What's happening here?" Those connection moments are why I do it. Okay, now you can talk about digital.
Okay. All right. I'm glad you slowed me down and we hit that point. All right. Well, let's talk about um, digital, but I'd like to talk about it in the context of how digital sort of coincided with the decision to um, expand independent collectivism. So you have been a key part of many of the discussions which sort of started, I believe, in the late 90s about independent collectivism. At least this is from my perspective, from my outside perspective. So maybe, was it coincidental that the advent of digital sort of coincided with, for instance, the beginning of AIM, the Association of Independent Music, in 1999?
It was initially coincidental because what got AIM started really was a decision by the European Union that the majors could not license MTV collectively. And it forced the majors to license MTV individually and put MTV in a position where they were thinking, well, how do we hoover up all the independents then? Well, let's just hoover them up for nothing and they'll give us their music for promotion. And as a group of independents that knew each other, a bunch of us said, we're not doing that. And we had a standoff between ourselves and MTV, which was resolved at 4 o'clock on a Friday morning by them paying us a decent amount of money, which they're still paying. And that proved to us that if we collectivized, we could stand tall and get equal treatment. And then digital happened. And when digital happened, it was perfectly obvious very early on that the big guys were going in and doing deals and eating a lot of our lunch. And we realized that we were going to eat our own lunch. We needed to collectivize, and then we'd be 20% of the market rather than 0.5% of the market. And fairly soon we started proving the theory that together we could do better.
Did you have, I guess, staying with the digital piece of this for a minute? Well, if I was going to make a list of your skills as an executive, one of the things that I would focus on is what I perceive anyway as your ability to, when a new consumption form or medium of music comes along, to even if you're not entirely across the technical details of what is happening with that format of music, you always seem to understand where it fits in the sort of the music utility function, and hence what the compensation level should be for it. I always found that to be a really reassuring and interesting skill that I've tried to emulate too. And I'm just curious if you saw that skill as or when you were applying that skill to digital, if you thought digital was going to be as big as it became.
I think in terms of the value thing, I guess that was inculcated into me by being a board member of PPL and VPL, which I was, and developing our own philosophies and realizing that it's very easy to give away music, but you're not really doing anyone any favors by doing so. And that there's a real value to it. And the value of promotion, if you like, has been a constant battle over the decades since before we started. I mean, promotion departments have always said to business affairs departments, there's value in this exposure, let's do it, let's not worry about getting paid. But if you're representing artists and earning revenue for them, you have to stand up for that value. And and we've always done that. And we've kind of been seen as being a bit hard ass at times and maybe a bit tough, but you have to defend the value of your music. I mean, there are people out there today who are not doing that. You know, that's a lot of what the whole TikTok debate is about. And you see people like our friend Mr. Grange saying one thing and our friend in France saying another thing. It's the same old battle that has been being fought for more than half a century, that there has to be a value to music, even if there's a benefit to the exposure.
Let's jump into that. So I don't mean directly into that, but I want to fill in some information around that. So we started talking about AIM and about the collective value that could occur with an organization like AIM, and then eventually also an organization like A2IM, the American Association of Independent Music, and other affiliated organizations around the world. There are a lot of independent organizations now. I'm thinking WIN, the Worldwide Independent Network,
Mm.
Merlin, of course. Impala is another one. Can you just talk for a minute about that structure and about how it all works? Because some people in the audience probably aren't as familiar with it as maybe you and I are.
It's quite a structure these days, and if you think about the number of people as independents that we have employed for us collectively around the world, it must be never added it up, but it must be over 100. And we were talking before we came in air about kind of the herding cats aspect of putting independents together, and obviously independents are by nature independent and entrepreneurial and pl plying their own parts all the time, and actually putting them together and creating a common interest has been an extraordinary achievement, I think, by a lot of people. And to see it spreading from the obvious countries to the less obvious countries is a real treat. And I think WIN now has members in 29 different countries, and WIN has a delegation of significantly busy people going out to Mexico in a week or two to talk to Mexico about forming an association there, which is a gap in our repertoire at the moment. But those organizations are all important in individual territorial ways. The challenge for us is really to make them all communicate as one together. And there are a lot of people there and a lot of different views. I think one thing we need to do at the moment is try and distill a clear collective voice into the overall representation. So that's one of the things that people are setting their minds to at the moment.
Okay. Um, let's hold that thought for a minute and maybe move sideways a bit. So um, one of the other one of the other decisions that were made within the independent world, this would be a little bit later, but was the idea to create an independent sort of an indie week, and the Libero Awards. Can you talk a little bit about why that happened, and what the thinking was around that?
Yes, I think the awards concept started with AIM. I think we did them in the UK first, um, and they were frankly a triumph. And putting everyone in a room with everyone else that wanted to buy a table and casting votes in favour of one great album over another, it just felt fantastic. It felt really empowering. And when we started doing it in America, and Portia Sabin should get a lot of credit for this, and the first Liberas, it was a wonderful feeling to have your whole community in a room and just celebrate each other's successes, be pleased by not only your own results and wins, but also other people's. I think was always just a real buzz. And as both the AIM and the A2M ones have grown over the years, they've become a kind of a celebration of our community in a way which I take great pleasure from.
That last line is my favorite part of it, a celebration of our community. So, what I saw during that time period was, um, the big organizations of music skipping over, or really just lip servicing independent releases. And this was a celebration of independent music. That was the beauty of it, from the very first one of those that I ever went to, which was in the basement of Le Poisson Rouge, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to say anything else about that, or?
I know.
Okay, great. So let's transition a little bit. I want to get into some more industry-wide topics. I sort of think of, so at this point, we're in the late aughts, and Beggars has really sort of coalesced into group, which includes Matador Records at this point. It includes Rough Trade. It includes XL Recordings. It includes 4AD, of course, and Young, I think, at that point, although it could have been a little bit later. Um, so, the group structure is firmly ensconced, um, and you as a label group, and I was out of the label proper at this point, but I just continued to see you doubling down on this idea of independence in the face of what was happening more broadly in the music industry, which is the majors making moves to consolidate, to buy up independent record labels for market share. And I thought maybe we could start this part of the conversation by just talking about um, the music pie. So, we had gone from the ability to sell music a la carte, as a piece, to music being a portion of a pie, music revenue, sorry, being a portion of a pie, the streaming revenue pie. So, um, and there's a currently a DCMS inquiry uh, uh, in that is part of the discussion around this particular issue. So maybe can you start there and talk about the idea of a music pie? What is it I mean when I say that?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that the starting point for a lot of this is that the streaming income is a pie. If you look at the world of downloads, you could charge what you wanted for a download without affecting what anyone else got paid. But when streaming started, we realized pretty quickly that the majors were steaming in and and telling the DSPs and the new nascent DSPs that their market share was bigger than it was, and they were getting a deal with the DSPs that reflected the market share that they claimed rather than market share that they had. And that was going to come out of the independent share of the pie. So it became pretty clear that when you have a finite amount of money for exploitation, it becomes much more sensitive what your share is than in the download world. And so the kind of the streaming wars, if you like, began, and people started getting very sensitive about how much they made from streaming, and there's been an awful lot of shit talked about streaming. I mean, I think it's a fantastic resource. Um, I completely understand people that say that they don't like it as a concept because of what it does to how people consume music. But in the business of generating income of music, I think is overwhelmingly a good thing rather than a bad thing. And yeah, at this time of year, twice a year, I go through all the royalty statements that we send out, and almost without exception, I see our artists doing better in the streaming world than in the world before streaming. So I'm a believer in streaming. I know it feels that it's very, very slow to build up the income, but it goes on forever. And I often look at P&Ls of projects that we're 18 months into and think, that's not going well. And then a few years later, I looked at it again and I think that's amazing. Now it's in profit. How did that happen? Because it ticks, tocks, and it just keeps on going. Um, on the other hand, obviously, now that we're in the streaming world, the income from new releases turns up much more slowly. So uh, the investment takes a lot longer to recoup. You've got to hold your breath for a lot longer on that, which benefits labels like us, which have a long history and a long catalogue. But I'm a fan of streaming as a business model, um, and I think we're fortunate to be living in this era because if we weren't, I think we would not be in good shape.
Okay. I want to stick with this piece of the discussion for a moment around Universal specifically. So in 2012, you were invited to participate on a Senate panel, Judiciary Committee, I believe. And I reread some of the testimony from that. Your testimony, Lucian Grange's testimony, and what was clear then. It's interesting to read it now, actually, because essentially there was Lucian's testimony, which was there's nothing happening here, and besides it's difficult business circumstances, and we're not the tail that wags the dog. And you saying, and I don't want to paraphrase, but sort of the opposite, that this is really important to look at. And distributed market share versus owned market share is going to become an issue, um, because the distributed market share is going to be taken from us, from the independents collectively in negotiation of digital deals. So, 12 years down the road, we have um, we have a very big player in the music space. And I guess I'd just love to hear your thoughts about whether what you uh, testified you thought was going to happen actually occurred.
Well, it's a long story, and it goes back longer than that, to be honest. It goes back to the beginning of these mergers and the Sony BMG merger, which happened a few years before that. And Impala, which is our European independence organization, made a decision to oppose that. And it was a brave decision. I mean, I think I was chairman of Impala at that point, and we had a board meeting in Berlin. And the choice before us was, do we sue the European Commission for allowing this merger through or not? And that's a pretty ballsy thing for a bunch of independent record labels to sue your own government. And I remember we did but before we started discussing it, I asked for a vote around the table as to whether we should do it or not. And there were like three people that thought we should sue and 20 that thought not. And after an hour's debate, it turned around and it was 20 who wanted to sue and three who didn't. And we sued the government and we won. It was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory in the end because of other things that happened. But we actually sued our own government and we won. And that really emboldened us to think we can really have an impact on these moves because the majors were busy merging not just for fun but for business profits and to dominate the marketplace. And it seemed inconceivable when we were down to four majors that the four could become three. And I remember talking to Richard Constant, who's the evil genius behind the universal purchase of EMI at a conference. And I said, you can't possibly think about going for EMI, can you? And he said, watch his space. And he was a genius because he got it through. Um, but what he got through was something that's created a company that is large and getting larger. And Universal are clearly the market leader. And when I think as market leaders go, they're a very good one. They're smart, they're aggressive, they uphold value, they do quite a lot of things which all of us like, but they also dominate the market. And that EMI deal has given them the scale, even though it's taken them 8 or 10 years to realize it, in which they can now own 75% of the charts, 40% of the marketplace. And I think that's a dangerously high percentage and it's only going to grow. And the rest of us need to think about what we need to do about that. But I think it's particularly unhealthy for the creators. I remember when this first happened, I got given an award by the Music Producers Guild in London, and I made a speech and I said the people who are really going to suffer here are the session musicians, the sleeve designers, the producers, the people who are individual creators who are going to have to be friends with Universal. They cannot offend Universal or they've got no life. And that's a very dangerous place to be in a creative world.
True. And then we're also seeing opportunities for music consumption emerge. And I guess one that comes to mind is spatial audio, where the entrance cost is significant, and
Mhm.
there's maybe an unequal ability to participate, and the cost of not participating is less income.
Yeah, I mean, we have a problem with that at the moment because basically artists are being forced into performing in a particular format, which they may or may not like. And if they fail to, then they get penalized financially. And I'm all for what Apple are doing with spatial. I think it's a great technology, and I just don't think that those who are participating in it should be doing so and making more money at the expense of those that are not.
That's probably a good lead in to the next thing I want to talk about, which is artist centric, or so-called artist centric compensation. And this is I mean, it's not an industry wide structure necessarily. This is a structure that was reported Universal developed, I think, first in conjunction with Deezer, and launched with their own deals. So, but there's spillover, right? So once a deal like this happens, that's a high profile deal that represents a shift. Um, that has an impact throughout the rest of the market. And just to step back for a second and put some history out there for those in the audience who don't understand this or unaware of it. So music compensation is for many, many years in the streaming space has been based on the pro rata model, which is just you take the revenue and you divide it by the number of plays, and then you distribute that out pro rata. And for a good 10 years, there have been other proposals for different ways to slice that same revenue up. Not necessarily to grow it, but to split it up differently. User-centric, for instance, was around for a long time. Now, a lot of the air seems to have been sucked out of the room on the user-centric discussion in favor of artist-centric. And the problem or the challenge with artist-centric is the idea that, amongst other things, some music isn't compensated. And even if it's performed in a streaming music service, it's not compensated. So can you talk about artist centric and sort of your thoughts or reactions as a label group about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with streaming is the size of the pie. The size of the pie needs to grow, and unless it does, you're only tinkering around the edges with it in terms of who gets what. Um, so what we're seeing at the moment is, I think, a renewed push from the big copyright owners to increase their size of the pie. It's the old battle, but on different battleground, and they're doing it by valuing the higher performing copyrights at a different rate. Um, and I think fundamentally that whatever way you look at it, this is taking from the rich, sorry, taking from the poor and giving to the rich. And I find that pretty unpalatable and offensive. I can see why people might want to clean up the zillions of tracks that are sitting on services doing nothing. I'm not actually sure that does any harm, but I can see it doesn't do any good. And I can definitely understand why. Um, I mean, in a world where I think the majors deliver only 3 or 4% of the music that's on services, so the rest is coming from hobbyists and long tail players. Um, I think it doesn't feel great to have all that wasted energy out there in terms of making music, putting music up that no one listens to. Um, but I'm really not sure it's right to take money away from those people effectively and give it to the big guys, and effectively create a situation in which the entry price of being on a streaming service is paying a toll to Universal. That doesn't seem acceptable to me. And I think that for the effect it's going to have, which is relatively tiny, it's a huge amount of effort for not very much. Um, it seems to me that a much better approach would be to charge a little bit for your track to be on a service, whether it's a one-off charge or an annual charge. It had to be very small, but if there's a little financial disincentive to put your music in a place where nothing's going to happen, then I think that would kind of create a self-regulating way of determining what gets put up. But at the moment, I think this is the wrong solution to the wrong problem.
Okay. Um, I have I guess just a general question. I mean, do you think with some portion of music on a digital streaming service that's uncompensated, Do you do you foresee this resulting in the end of the sort of universal jukebox idea? Is that feasible, or is that, I mean, for instance, in favor of music moving to different niches where it is fully compensated? I mean, do you think that is a possible outcome of all of this?
I'm not sure, not quite sure what you're asking me.
I'm asking whether right now, the I guess the vision of, I would say, the majority of the large digital streaming services is that they have all the music that exists in the world, or that they ideally will have all the music that exists in the
Okay.
world. So as you
But
start taking, not paying for a portion of that, are you sort of diffusing the idea that all of the music in the world belongs on a streaming service?
maybe. I mean, obviously, no one's ever going to listen to all the music in the world, so it's a fairly hypothetical concept. I think it's. I think that there has. I would say I could see the benefit of anyone being able to do anything with any of their music, but to be able to do that for nothing and have every digital store have all of its shelves filled with the 100,000 tracks that get uploaded every night just seems to me to kind of goes into a realm of I'm not sure. It's kind of immaterial. What's material is what people want to listen to.
Okay, let's talk. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's shift to talk a little bit about alternative funding. So, and the rise of alternative funding. So, um, one of the business constructs that I've seen happen over the last, uh, I guess, 5 to 6 years, are companies like Acceleration Music, for instance, which is providing alternative funding to independent record labels so that they don't have to um, sell to a major, for instance, or so they have an option to continue business and not sell to a major. So I'm just curious what your perception is of these kinds of entities in the marketplace. I presume it's positive, but I'd love to hear you talk about it.
I think it's great. I think acceleration have a great concept. They were it's kind of not that dissimilar to our concepts. Our concept took 50 years to develop rather than three or four. And it's I think it's always easier to do things slower rather than fast. But I think that the concept of providing support to labels that means they don't have to go to the majors or to the um, directly to the VC market. I think it's got to be healthy in the same way as I think it's great that there are many ways for an artist to get their music out there other than through a traditional label. I think that's got to be a good thing. And if that's competition, then it's good competition. Um, I think what it does create is a little bit of a confusion about who's what, because at the moment you've got the majors delivering 3% of their music on DSPs. The other 97% is therefore independent. And yet, the kind of people who are releasing that music are a very varied bunch of different of business types, which go far beyond the concept of original independent label. And I think really that the concept of independent needs to be moderated these days. And if you call, where we come from and our friends at Domino and Secretly and whatever as being an independent label, I think that the distro kids of this world are something almost completely different because they're not in there to develop value from their music, they're in there to develop scale of delivery, and that's a different thing. And I also think that do it yourself is different. I think one person setting up a label to release just their music is qualitatively different from a label that's releasing more than one artist. So to me, they're kind of four different buckets of ways of dealing with rights these days, rather than the two that we have. And to my mind, the fact that the independent side of it's got so big has resulted in a kind of dilution of the identity of independence in a way. And I'd rather kind of pull it back a little bit and be a bit more traditional about it, if you like.
You know, this idea of independent identity has always been so formative to my own exploration of music. The idea that music brand was connected to music exploration and music discovery. Uh, it's very much how I discover music. Um, on the other hand, my daughter approaches it completely different, in a completely different manner. She listens to music on digital platforms. She'll listen to whatever music from whatever artist on whatever label, and it doesn't really matter to her. I'm um, interested to see the what happens with the impact of brands as the years peel away here, whether music brands as filters will be as important as they ever were, or whether that'll change.
I personally, I think they will. I think a lot of people would disagree with both of us on that. But I think that if you run a record label, then one of the things that's most important is, in cricketing terms, your batting average. You have to make every release count. If you release a whole bunch of stuff that isn't that great, doesn't really connect at all, then people are going to pay less attention to what you do next. It's really important to keep on putting out great stuff. And one of the things I spend most of my time doing is making sure that we release as few records as possible rather than as much as possible, which I know is the current trend, because I think everyone counts. And over the last few years, we released an average of 33 albums a year across our five labels. It's not very much at all. Um, but I think it's really important to only release something that's great.
You offered some advice, and I might not remember exactly how you offered it, but you said something along the lines of if you're starting a new record label, don't think about how you can succeed at it. Think about doing a good job
Mhm.
at it, and success will follow, which seems like a pretty good description
Well,
of the.
I think if you're our kind of record label, as opposed to a Believe um, or one of the new aggregators, then you should only be doing something because you love it and you want to do it and you've got something you think you want to be part of and getting out there. Never do it for the money.
Uh,
You know, there can be other businesses that uh, should do it to make money, but I think for where we are all at and our community is at, we're doing it because we want to do it. And if you're lucky, making the money comes after.
what do you? We're actually getting up close to the top of the hour at this point, but I do have another question for you, and maybe there's some other ones, Tom. If there's anything that you wanted to sort of bring to the fore, feel
I
free
was
to do
just
it.
thinking that you're obviously born to be DJ. You quit saying words like on the top of the hour. You wish you'd had a
Right?
breakfast
Yeah.
yet, right?
Exactly. Okay. Well, the future. You've had a lens on the future. In a way that I think um, it certainly has impressed me over the years. Uh, if not a lens, at least an understanding of what was coming. And I guess I'm curious what you see happening in the next 10 years, or pick the time frame. Where do you see the music industry, especially the independent music industry, heading over the next 10 years?
Well, we're not going to talk about AI.
Mm.
I would hope more of the same. I think the strength of the independent community is very important because I think most great new musical genres have started off in the independent sector, whether it's punk or house or hip hop, whatever it is. So I think independents contribute new music to the world in a way that the big businesses don't. So I hope that they and we survive and thrive. I would like to think that people are going to want to continue consuming music. I would like to think that people will trust labels that release great music. Um, I think it's very important that the value of music maintains and grows. And again, I applaud those who fight the battle of making our music worth more. Um, music is something that changes people's lives. It's a soundtrack to people's lives. It's made a lot of us who we are, and I hope that we can allow it to thrive in the difficult, increasingly difficult world in which we live. Um, and what we do collectively as independents, I think, is important with a capital I, if you like. And I'm proud that we succeed to the extent we do. And I love the fact that we enjoy each other's successes. I mean, when Universal have a big record, you can literally hear Sony cursing them, but that doesn't happen in our world.
That seems like a, I mean, I hate to cut this short, but that seems like a great place to wind up this discussion. It's a very positive, forward-looking statement. Tom, did you want to call out anything from the chat? I was sort of watching it, but sort of not watching it. So,
Yeah, there's actually one question that just popped into the chat here at the very end that may be germane. Martin, do you have any thoughts on blockchain and how it might create additional value for the value of music? Can it revalue it?
No, no, I don't have any thoughts.
Okay, fair enough.
And
Well,
I mean, one of the things I do, I mean, Dick touched it. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we are who we are is because we have employed people over the years and of different generations, and we employ. We, just because we've been going for nearly 50 years doesn't mean we're a company of 70-year-olds. We employ people of all generations, and I believe that you employ young people with new ideas, and you give them the opportunity to develop them and work with them to your benefit and theirs. And I'm sure I have people working for me that totally into blockchain, but I would leave it to them.
terrific. Well, Dick, thank you so much for bringing Martin to the table here. This has been awesome. And to the audience, I promised you a treat today. I think you got that in spades. Martin, you are a living legend. And I don't think I was incorrect when I was advertising this event as, you know, one of my heroes. And I think the metaphor of Luke Skywalker interviewing Yoda held up. Keep doing what you're doing for another 30 years, okay? To the audience, keep doing what you're doing, and that is keep coming back here on Thursdays at 2 o'clock Eastern. Next week, we'll be right here again. And with that, I will leave with my customary sign off of be nice to one another.
Thank you.
thanks again.
Thanks, Nick. That was a pleasure.
For me
Cheers.
too. Thank you.